Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to Copley Formal Lounge for this very special event. And we're privileged this morning by the presence of Dato Seri Anwar Ibrahim, President of the People's Justice Party of Malaysia. And we look forward to the opportunity to hear his reflections on democracy in the Muslim world, post-Arab Spring, in conversation with our own John Esposito. And Dato Seri Anwar, we're deeply grateful to have you joining us this morning and to welcome you back to Georgetown. I'm also pleased to welcome University Professor, Founding Director of our Prince Al-Walid bin Talal Center for Muslim Christian Understanding, John Esposito, who will engage with Anwar in conversation this morning. In addition to his leadership of the Al-Walid Center, John also serves as project director of the Bridge Initiative here at Georgetown, which is a research project focused on Islamophobia. He's the former president of the Middle East Studies Association of North America and the American Council for the Study of Islamic Studies, and the author of more than 30 books, including Islamophobia, The Challenges of Pluralism in the 21st Century, and The Oxford History of Islam. So, John, I want to thank you for being here in conversation today, and I'd like to take a moment to offer special recognition of our colleagues at the Prince Al-Walid bin Talal Center for Muslim Christian Understanding, whose efforts have brought us together this morning. For over 25 years, the center has worked to strengthen relations between the Muslim and Western world and deepen the understanding of Islam in the West. During an extraordinary moment for our global community amid enormous upheavals, increasing globalization, historic transformation in the Arab world, we remain grateful for the work of the center and for the opportunities like this conversation today to reflect on important and urgent matters facing our global community. This morning, we're honored to welcome back to Georgetown Anwar Ibrahim, the current leader of the Pakatan Harapan Coalition of Malaysia, president of the People's Justice Party, and the anticipated 8th Prime Minister of Malaysia. Over the course of a lifelong political career, Anwar has devoted himself to meaningful reform, advocating for the strengthening of democracy and the rule of law, as well as unity among the diverse ethnic and religious populations of Malaysia. He began his life in politics as a founder of Malaysia's Islamic youth movement and rose quickly through the ranks of the United Malays National Organization, going on to serve as Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister and steering Malaysia through times of challenge, including the Asian financial crisis of 1997. He's engaged with some of the most pressing questions facing Malaysia and some of the most pressing questions facing our global community, ranging from corruption to international relations to economic repair, as well as the protection of freedom of speech. In 1998, he became one of the world's most prominent political prisoners when he was jailed after public disagreement with the ruling party's leadership in Malaysia. He would go on to be acquitted and lead the opposition party in the highly contested 2013 election, only to be imprisoned again the following year. Of May of last year, he was granted a full royal pardon and has embarked on a remarkable process of rebuilding in partnership with current Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad. Anwar has also served as the president of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization World Council and chairman of the Development Committee of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. We're honored for him to have served as a distinguished visiting professor and former Malaysia chair here at our Al-Walid Center for Muslim Christian Understanding. So we're grateful to have Anwar here today for his witness, for his exceptional resilience and leadership in our global community, and for offering us this opportunity to engage with him and exploring the critical issues of democracy in the Muslim world. So I want to thank you all for being here this morning. I want to turn this over to Anwar to offer any opening reflections he might want to provide, and then to turn it to John to guide us in conversation this morning. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum and a very good afternoon. President DeGioia, John Esposito, distinguished guests. I'll begin only with a few personal remarks before we commence with this onslaught by John in the conversations. Now, I must, on behalf of Aziza and my family, express my profound gratitude to the president of this university, DeGioia, for their relentless support and sympathy all those years that I was in prison. He took this rare initiative, I'll share with you, because this was a very confidential sort of arrangements, on behalf of this university to persuade the then Secretary of State, John Kerry, to allow me to be treated in the hospital here from prison. I know it will not happen, but the fact that it was taken up to the Secretary of State, the then Secretary of State agreed and sent a message and negotiated with the then Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and later taken up by President Obama himself. That is, of course, commendable. I mean, sitting down in prison, experiencing what you know as unfreedom, you realize that you have friends. More than just friends, but committed friends. Committed because they believe in the cause of justice and humanity. So that was a major sort of a source of strength to me and my family and our colleagues. We know it's not going to happen, but the fact that you do take such an initiative to someone hardly known in the States, some political prisoner far out in Kuala Lumpur, I think was, to me, was really very meaningful. And more so because I'm a Muslim, and this is a Jesuit university. To some, it may be a contradiction, but this is a very important message. When I speak to the masses in Malaysia, I say, look, we are Muslims, and why do we talk about understanding and justice for all? It's because when we face this ordeal, there are Christians and Jews, Hindus or Buddhists, and in this case, the Catholics took up our cause as part of their cause. And I think this would speak volumes, more than books or lectures, but by sheer commitment and passion for justice and concern for the welfare of humanity. You have done a great service, not only to me personally, but to Muslim-Christian understanding and the world community of faith and humanity at large. So let me just express my personal gratitude, President DeGioia. My visit to the United States soon after I was released, again for so many times released, I've got to tell you the years. So in 2018, I said, I must not miss an occasion to come here and personally thank the President and his team, John, Esposito, and many friends who make it happen. Thank you very much.
The first time I met you, not the first time I met you, the first time I met you after you moved into the government, I remember that with Fred Vandermeiden, we came into your office, and the first thing he said to us was, so what are they saying out there? Am I a shooting star? And you shot, and you continue to shoot, and if things go well, you'll be there again. Having said that, let's talk about some of the questions that we see in the world today. We saw a push for democracy during the Arab Spring. We've seen a rolling back. We've seen a sense in which there's been a coup. We've seen a sense in which authoritarian governments have entrenched themselves even more strongly in the Gulf. And people raise the question, in light of all of this, you know, is democracy going to be possible in the Arab world? And is it compatible with Islam?
We talk about democracy and particularly in the Muslim world, these last years was certainly a period or era of despair. Arab Spring was seen by many Muslims and also in the West as this glimmer of hope that things will change. It failed not only miserably, but the reaction was hostile with more draconian measures. So the event, the phenomenal development in Malaysia during the elections was certainly unprecedented. But to me, it is clearly a sign of hope that it could happen in a Muslim majority country. But unlike a more exclusive view about Islam or Islamic movements or Islamic parties, the Muslims in Malaysia realize that we must work as a community of Muslims, Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, and animist with a clear agenda. We want democracy, we want justice, we want to rid the country of corruption, we want them to make sure that no community will be marginalized or ignored. This was to me phenomenal, and I hope we can share with many of our friends in the Muslim world and also the West, particularly Washington these days, that has withdrawn from this mission or at least commitment to support democratic reforms throughout the world.
When we look at Malaysia and Indonesia, in contrast to most countries, let's say in the Middle East, you have countries that have been for a long time multi-ethnic, multi-religious societies. And on the one hand, they are pointed to with a sense of hope and future, and certainly looking at Indonesia and its move down a democratic path, looking at now the way in which a government was through the ballot box ousted in an election that almost no one could have predicted. I found I was there a week before the elections and was surprised at some of the people who wanted to see Najib out but thought that it would be inconceivable that he could be out. And so now there's that looking to the future. At the same time, in recent years, there have been, both in Indonesia and in Malaysia, clear strained relations at times between and among the religious traditions, religious and cultural traditions there. How do you situate that? I mean, do you situate it in terms of the approach? Do you situate it with the concepts that you discussed in the past, the reformasi, and also Asian values? I mean, do you still see that as, you know, a major kind of outlook and way to address this kind of development?
Yeah, racism, parochialism, religious bigotry still there, which means we must do more to disseminate information, to create this awareness, conscientization, as you say. It's in half Italian, so you know I have to pronounce rightly. But I think for now things seems okay. But you know, this happened in Malaysia with the growing rise of racism in Europe, and also religious bigots, even India. But we have shown both in Indonesia and Turkey, although it's less multicultural as compared to Malaysia, that we can work if towards democracy, and if we work together as a large community and family. And I remember Edward Said in responding to Huntington's Clash of Civilizations talk about clash of ignorance. And if you look at antecedents of history, you realize that the issue of incompatibility between Islam and democracy is certainly not the case. Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world. It is a democracy. India has the largest or second largest Muslim population in the world, and Muslims support the democratic process. And Turkey and now Malaysia, although we're about 60% of the population are Muslims. So the issue is compatibility does not arise. But it does not seem to happen in the Middle East, at least for now. I think given some time, I was joking in Cairo these days that probably they have been too long under the Pharaoh to appreciate democratic spirit. But of course, it's an unfair statement to the Democrats in Egypt, because given a chance, first through a free media, second through a free, fair elections, people will still choose, unless you choose to have elections like those days in Iraq. I was telling this story yesterday, last night, that in Iraq, one guy came back to the house and said, Papa, Mama, I have voted. So I said, what do you vote for? Who do you vote for? I said, no, we don't want Saddam. He said, you are crazy, you are mad. If you do that, we all be killed. There's no security for us. So he said, what do? You go back and correct the vote. So he went back, met the polling booth chief and said, sir, I want to correct my vote. What did you do? I was confused. I thought I made the right decision, but actually I voted wrongly. I was wrong. What did you do? I did not vote for Saddam. So what do you want to do? I want to correct that. I said, don't worry, my son. It's all done. So hopefully, so there's still hope given the situation where elections are free and fair.
It's interesting, a colleague of ours who used to be here and is now in Qatar was commenting that, and who had been a supporter of the coup in Egypt, that she and many Egyptians are now referring to Sisi as Bonaparte in terms of his sense of himself, Napoleon Bonaparte. So it's interesting to see that work. What do you think, dovetailing what you were saying about Indonesia and Malaysia with the broader Asian situation, you talked about an Asian Renaissance in the past. What would an Asian Renaissance look like for you if you could make it happen or work with others to make it happen? What would an Asian Renaissance look like?
You see, I conducted a series of conferences, very important for the Muslim world. Normally we talk about Renaissance, we may talk about Malik bin Nabi and societal reform, or Al-Kawakibi, or Al-Ghani and Iqbal. I could see these are important figures. But we're talking about Asians. So I started with Jose Rizal, a Christian Filipino, whom I consider as the precursor of Asian Renaissance, because he talked about political independence, economic independence, reading the country of the psyche of subjugation, of colonial mentality, and of course talking about dignity of man. Then we had the conversation on Al-Ghani, then Iqbal, and I think it is how we create a narrative. The problem is, although we talk about Rahmatan lil Alameen, for humanity, the message, the Islamic message is for humanity, but oftentimes within the Muslim society, we fail to support this meaningful engagement. I'm not suggesting that we support necessarily what the West, the Western attitude, bias, the remnants of colonial prejudices, which was well articulated by from Khaldun to Malik bin Nabi to Frantz Fanon. Yes, I concede that, which is still a major problem, like in engaging with the West. Many in the West, they still talk about clash of civilizations. Huntington is the only source that you can depend on. He becomes like the Bible. And however much we try and combat these arguments, it is still tough. But having said that, John, it's also a problem within the Muslim society themselves. Do we think that we can promote understanding or religious understanding of Islam if we continue to proceed on an exclusive, Islamist old framework of we and them, like the colonial we and the other. So I think we must truly engage within the Muslim society. Is a problem and dynamics within Muslim society which must be addressed. So it has to be both. One clear example is we want good, independent, credible Islamic studies in Western institutions, which is very important. And congratulations to your effort. Phenomenal. And with Jonathan there now. But what we fail to do is to have a similar effort within Muslim societies to create this sort of center of civilizational dialogues or Muslim-Christian understanding, or in Malaysia will be Islam and Confucianism and Hinduism and Buddhism. We did conduct a major conference many years back when I was in government, Islam and Confucianism, which some Muslims were shocked. Why must we talk about it? But we were surprised when they could bring, at that time, Tu Wei Ming was still at Harvard, now he's Beijing, but he came and introduced Confucianism and showed such stark similarities between Confucianist teachings and ideals and Islam. And that's what we need in this world. To my humble mind, the scholar is you. I'm just...
No, I think you're spot on. I think the challenge is how does that get accomplished, and especially how does one adapt to the notion that really one needs to think about multiple modernities, not only in trying to talk about non-Western societies vis-a-vis Western societies, but I would say even within the Muslim world itself, because the sense that there is an ummah, a global community is an important one, but sometimes one forgets about the extent of the diversity and a healthy diversity, rather than the approach that everything should be Arabized, to bring it together. I wonder, when you look at the situation in Southeast Asia, do you see the idea that there should be even, for example, closer relationship between Indonesia and Malaysia, in the near future, given the linguistic connection as well as the religious connection?
I am a great promoter from the past of this very cohesive, strong bond of relations between Malaysia and Indonesia, because it's a common history. It's one nation before the colonial powers came, and one language, and the majority Muslims. They have Hindus, Christians, and Buddhists, small numbers. We have some, and I think this exchanges is useful. And Indonesia have been able to navigate their way in a seemingly more tolerant sort of arrangements. They have what called the Muhammadiyah, Nahdlatul Ulama, some different trends, emphasis on Islamic understanding, but by and large, from they have been able to create this new awareness on indigenous efforts to set up institutions. I remember reading Fazlur Rahman, who said that this is unique in modern times in terms of the effort of the community to initiate societal reforms through education. It is unprecedented in any part of the Muslim world these days.
Well, why don't we turn to the audience, otherwise we'll go on and dominate the time. We have about 25 minutes. So if you would, do we have microphones here? We do? Okay. Yeah.
First of all, welcome.
Wait a second, there's a mic coming. And why don't you give your name and then...
You know my name.
I know your name, that's why I called on you.
That's for the Mukhabarat, for the special branch.
Mowahid Hussain Shah, and you're a very good friend of my brother Mushahid, who's also spoken
Yes.
about you. I think what you underwent also is an indictment of the Muslim world. That we have coronated dacoits and thieves and brigands in power. And when somebody like you, who has finished Shakespeare in prison, is treated like that, I think it's a reflection about the decay in our society, where we, despite our faith in the Almighty Allah, which is more or less a ritualistic lip service, in practice there is a great sense of idolatry of throne and money and power. But my question is basically, what do you identify as the burning issues in the Muslim world? And what path forward do you see? 2 or 3. But I also want to make a point here. You talk of intolerance. I have served in the cabinet in Pakistan. I have outreach to Hindus, Christians, and Muslims, taken part in Christmas activities. My brother used to basically illuminate the Muslim League offices with the Diwali celebrations and Christmas. But the message we are getting now, loud and clear in Pakistan, which is a very pivotal country, the world's, I think, 10th largest English-speaking country, that how 2 women who are Muslims, who have been recently elected and are part of the US Congress, how are they being treated by their colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, just for giving their point of view and how they're being treated. That message is going out. Perhaps the Western world, particularly at the elite level, what they say is not being matched by actions. And perhaps there is very serious disinterest in engaging with the Muslim world on a concrete level. That's a very, very serious point of view, that perhaps there's no constituency for a sustained amity between the Muslim world and the Western world. Thank you.
The Quranic term for understanding, lita'arafu, interreligious, tribal, not even tolerance, is beyond tolerance. Because the ta'arafu would mean you have to learn and know, appreciate one another. I'm not talking about the practice. The practice is, of course, horrific in many Muslim societies. Within the Muslim world, we need to create this awareness, sense of confidence, that to respect, understanding the other religions does not weaken your faith or your resolve. I come here in the Jesuit University, I sense that during the iftar or breakfast, we have the university encouraging the sessions, professors attending and showing their respect and support to the students. I think this is, to me, a great tradition, which we must also do towards the Hindus or the Christians or the Buddhists in Malaysia, which precisely I do. I do attend. But it does not stop some others from condemning us. Either we are too pluralistic, and pluralism and liberal can be a bad word. I mean, John was dealing with these subjects when he was Kuala Lumpur last week. But some of us must have the courage to continue to say what is right. Now, this sort of understanding does not seem necessarily be practiced. I'm not assuming that it's being practiced necessarily in the West or the United States. There are some subjects which is clearly taboo. I follow, of course, the issue in the last few days. I would say fair in some of these comments. You can always explain, but the horror and the vicious attack for one statement like that. I mean, if it is in Malaysia against the Hindus or against the Muslims, we'll be quarreling every day. That shows that sort of understanding must be there. I am not condoning any disrespect or vicious attack against any religion. And I think I would testify in my work in the country, I was attacked for being too tolerant. There was a case of a Molotov cocktail being thrown to one church. We immediately appeared with the priest. And there were Muslims guiding that. This happens all over, but these are not reported. What is reported is a Molotov cocktail. What was not reported is that Muslim leaders appear and Muslim youth were guarding the church. in the next few weeks. I mean, I also understand this in Indonesia, in Egypt, which means we concede we need to do more. The arrogance of some parts of the West does not have that humility to concede that they need to be more tolerant and do more to create that awareness. I see John Walls there. Thank you.
Actually, I have a question. Just to follow up subjects that you and I talked about while you were here. You started off as a Malaysian identity advocate. What's the relationship between Malaysian identity and Islam?
To me, there's no contradiction. I mean, many works have been written. I mean, Amartya Sen, Kwame Apaya. Amartya Sen, one of his writings said, look, who am I? I am an Indian, I am a Hindu, I speak English, I read Shakespeare, I appreciate some major Islamic contribution towards India. So am I just Indian or Hindu? So it's a very complex issue. So to me, of course I'm a Muslim, I'm a practicing Muslim. I mean, no apologies about it. But I'm a Malaysian. And I'm a Muslim in Malaysia that I want to serve my community, and my community are Malaysians. And I will not compromise. They're not saying that in order to be a Malaysian, I must disregard Islamic values. No. But if, in order to serve as a Malaysian, this is my campaign slogan, to be an effective Malaysian leader, you must be able to rise above and say, a Malay child is my child, a Christian child is my child, a Hindu child is my child. Then you pass the test, the litmus test of being a Malaysian. But if you have just a plain rhetoric, but you ignore the plight of the poor, of any race, then it's not acceptable. So a Malaysian agenda, to me, as I have envisaged earlier, but even the economic agenda is not race-based, but a need-based. Having said that, we also realize that some rich Chinese does not do enough for the poor Indians or the poor Chinese, or the poor Malays. So I think, therefore, we need to create this awareness. It's not a Malay problem or a Chinese problem. It is a Malaysian problem that must be addressed as Malaysians. The problem of Muslim organizations, or what they term as sometimes Muslim movements, they tend to be exclusive. Islam, by nature and its message and risalah, to my mind, is always inclusive. Where you live, your neighbor, never said that you must only treat your Muslim neighbor. No, you must treat your neighbor. And I see that's also clear in the Christian ethics. But why do we then start these complex arrangements according to race or religion? The rest you will have to write a new article of that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dato Seri. I'm Tom Reckford with the Malaysia America Society. And I wonder if you could address a couple of issues between Malaysia and China. First, the Chinese military buildup in the Spratly Islands, and second, the Belt and Road initiatives in Malaysia that Prime Minister Mahathir has called a halt to.
Thank you. I must remind you that I served and I was punished and suffered enough 11 years in prison. So don't ask me difficult questions. Well, it is difficult because we're dealing with a big neighbor, powerful neighbor, rich neighbor. Our interest is to engage with all. We want trade investments to be further increased with the United States, with China, Europe. Now, but we do have a problem. Dr. Mahathir, known to be very frank in his views, said that contracts that are dubious in nature, questionable or corrupt will not be renewed or must be renegotiated. That was when he was in China, and I did visit China, a low-key visit. I'm just a citizen of Malaysia. And I met leading personalities within the Communist Party, and it explained. I said, look, we want the mandate. The mandate is for democracy, for transparency, and a strong condemnation of corrupt practices. And I would add, to me, even when we talk about the Sharia or Islam, it must begin with good governance. We cannot condone these excesses. There are too many sheikhs and muftis that support most corrupt and unjust regimes. I don't think that is something that we can condone any longer. So, having said that, I said to our friends in China, some of these questionable projects, first, we can ill afford. We can't afford to proceed with this 50, 60 billion ringgit, or 15, 20 billion dollar project anymore. Because the wealth of the nation was plundered by then Prime Minister Najib, proven that Goldman Sachs have finally to apologize. Because I mentioned to them that this heinous crime of plundering the wealth of the country could not have happened without the expertise of the international financial institutions that included Goldman Sachs. So they were complicit in the crime of plunder, and they have to pay back to the people for what they did. And I told the Chinese that, now if we take such a tough position against Goldman Sachs, we cannot concede and proceed with an arrangement that we found to be dubious. So right now we are renegotiating. If the price of the development of this new railway from the capital to the East Coast is acceptable by an independent adjudication and negotiations, we can proceed. And I told the Chinese, of course, we need your investments. We want China to be our friend. We need trade and investments. But we will have certain positions. I mean, we have to express our views on trade or in the plight of the Uyghur community, because, I mean, how do we expect, I told them, how do you expect me, after going through this horrendous experience and suffering, and suddenly, and completely oblivious to the sufferings of others. What have I learned? Almost 11 years in prison. I would have learned nothing if I don't have that passion for justice and compassion. So that's, in reality, our relations with China. But we continue to reassure them that contrary to the media view, we want China to remain a friend, trading partner, and invite investments from China.
Somebody had their hand up. Yeah, right there. Yeah, and then I'll come back down.
Hi, my name is Matt. Private citizen. I used to live in Kuching. Follow-up question about China and the Uyghur population. I'm curious why you said people have to, both in the Muslim world and non-Muslim world, have the courage to do what's right. Why has the Malaysian government, alone or with the Indonesian government, not made a more public statement against the treatment in Xinjiang? Thank you.
You see, you're not sympathetic to me at all. Number one, I don't represent the government. I'm just a citizen and an ordinary MP, Member of Parliament in Malaysia. The arrangement I had with Dr. Mahathir is that I should give him the space and latitude to lead the country, meanwhile, then to follow up with the reform agenda commitment. That's not satisfactory, an answer. Now, on Uyghur, I came out, I mean, the Uyghur community knows that, probably the first in the Muslim world, to say that please do something, that this is a problem. The fact that we did send back some of the Uyghur in Malaysia to Turkey after making the arrangements with Erdogan is because they are just professionals and businessmen. And if the allegations that they are terrorists, then you have to supply us with enough evidence. I do not in any way condone terrorism in any sense. But then we can't hold that people are terrorists just because of what is being said by any government. So now that Turkey, Erdogan has come up very strongly on this position, I think would then encourage more countries and governments to speak up. But you don't expect Muslim governments to do much more. I mean, can you expect General Sisi to condemn imprisonment without trial? That's being expecting too much. You have to be more kind to him, because there's no defense. So that is why, to my mind, issue of democratic transition and beyond that, democratic accountability is very important, because it will come back to the issue of ethical principles and good governance, which is unfortunately in deficit, not only Muslim countries, but also many countries in the West now.
Yeah. And then after that, the young woman in front.
Yes, Mike Anderson with the Malaysia America Society. Does the new government plan any changes in the area of press regulations and the sedition regulations that have been in effect a long time in Malaysia?
From May last year, after we won the elections, we have seen a free media. This is the first time we see a media feeling free to criticize and the government or the Prime Minister or me openly. Not that I like it. But that is a system we have promised the people. The mandate was for freedom and democracy, and we have done that. Now, there's legislations that are considered draconian, including Sedition Act, is now under review. Sometimes the issues like Sedition Act is not to be repealed in its entirety, because some people say, look, if you have a system royalty, then you must give them that sort of privilege, not to be abused to the extent that, because they do not have the right to reply. Normally they don't. So these are minor issues to my mind, which we need to scrutinize. But the commitment is to abolish all draconian acts that have been introduced in the past. But that would require time. For example, in March session this year, there will be few legislations that will be introduced and debated, because the process is different. I chair in Parliament, for the first time, a caucus on reform and governance, and would expect draft bills to be tabled to members of Parliament prior to be tabled to Parliament. And these are, new issues. We have never experienced this, because the bill is decided by the cabinet, introduced by a minister, and we voted. Yours is not to question why. But so in the present process, the process will require more time and more debate.
Yes.
I'm Yvonne Tu. I'm an associate professor at the Georgetown Law Center. It's good to see you again, Dato Seri. So my question is on Islam and its relationship with secularism. And I take it very compelling your point earlier about how Islam is not necessarily incompatible with a Malaysian identity, and I think that's very powerful. But the reason why I ask this is because the Malaysian political discourse over the last 20 years has very much been dominated by a rhetoric of whether Malaysia is an Islamic state or a secular state. We have the politicization of Islam by, for example, PAS, which says that Malaysia is an Islamic state, and rhetoric that has been pushing back against this idea that it's an Islamic state and yet not wanting to say that it is a secular state. In the line of Tunku Abdul Rahman, when Malaysia was originally founded, there was statements there at that point that this is supposed to be a multicultural secular state where Islam has a symbolic, important position, but not a predominant one. So how do you see that status of the role of religion in the state and its legal and constitutional implications, particularly with civil Sharia courts, the role of religious law, and the role of the state as a state religion? So beyond simply these the political, personal, community-focused ideas that we've been talking about, which are very compelling, but at the same time, I am curious about your thoughts on the constitutional implications.
No, I make no apologies to the fact that Malaysia should continue to respect religious values and consider values and ethics very dominant in our system. Is it therefore an Islamic state? No. Do you call it secular in the sense of laïcité, as they understand it in France? Certainly no. We are not a-religious in that sense or anti-religious. I mean, I have difficulty if I speak in San Francisco to get them to understand what I'm trying to say. But my point is, we cannot impose. What do we want? We want democracy. People should be free to articulate their views freely without inhibitions. But is there relevance in religion? Yes, why not? But do you impose your religious laws or practices on the others? No. So I think if we draw that line, we will not be entrapped with this sort of terms. Because secularism is suspect in many of the Muslims, among Muslim societies, because they see secularism as something in affront to religion. Well, it's not necessarily so. It's how you articulate the issue of, or explain, conceptual framework of religion. But you know, you're not discussing among academics. These are societies debating on this. Similarly, about Islamic State. Islamic states from the most corrupt and decadent to those talking about the ideal framework are there. But which one what do we mean by Islamic State? That's what, to me, I've never said. I've never suggested talking about Islamic State. I think I would say, what do you mean by Islamic State? If you want to talk about freedom, yes. Justice, yes. Right to people to practice their religion, yes. To enhance your understanding and your akhlaq, your character, or your shakhsiyah, your personality, I'm all for that. So, finally, what is important is to present a strong, clear modalities, principles in place so that there's no dispute. Not over terms, but over policies and practices. There has been, I agree with you, trends which is seemingly intolerant. You know, the issue of sexual orientation, that some people, because of the sentiments against, one was assaulted, the rest were condemned, abused publicly. So we have to say, look, we have inherited the laws from the British, the sodomy laws, for example, in 1947, and in India, brought to Malaysia, you know, complete, as it was introduced in 1947. I consider that archaic, unjust, and certainly not consistent with Islamic values too. Now, what about sexual orientation? I'm not there to judge. One has the right to their orientation. I don't have to judge. I will have probably the duty as a Muslim to explain. It's da'wah. But if you display it publicly, this is a problem. Not only homosexuality, even between men and women. We will not, the society, Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, by and large, you don't accept. Okay? There's a small group of civil society that want full freedom. But do we then concede to this 40, or do we then allow for societies to decide. You want to be liberal and democratic? Be liberal and democratic. Not therefore to compel others to accept your values. Because finally, in the Malaysian society, regardless whether they're Muslims or Christians or Buddhists, I sense there's general feeling that people must respect values and ethics and religious practices. But I certainly do not support this narrow, blinkered view of Islamic State as being promoted by some Muslim scholars and parties in Malaysia.
Very quick question, Syed Muhammad Sayyid.
Assalamu alaikum. I don't have to introduce myself. I represent the Islamic Society of North America, the oldest and the largest in America. We are celebrating our 55th anniversary this year, so that means half a century of growth, development, establishing Islamic centers, Islamic schools, several thousand Islamic centers. You have played a role in that from the very beginning when we invited you 46 years ago. And since then, you have come at different times. The only difference is in the past when you went back, you were going to jail. But this time, we are proud and we pray that when you go as the Prime Minister of Malaysia. So one thing I wanted to report to you and ask a question because it happened while you were in jail. It's possible it may not have been reported to you in full proportion. 2010, a crazy pastor in Florida threatened to burn the Quran. It created a major stir. Dozens of people died in Pakistan, in Malaysia, in Afghanistan, and so on. So you imagine now, my office is on the Capitol Hill, next door to Supreme Court, next door to Congress, and so on. So this was the situation our community was facing. It was not the burning of the Quran. It was the hate with which he was doing it. So at that time, the alliances that I had built at the grassroots level and on the national level, that came into action. U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops conveyed to me formally that they would like to support and they would like to strengthen if the way we can tell them how to do it at that time. Same with National Council of Churches, which represents the several 100,000 Protestant churches in America. Similarly, Union of Reformed Judaism with 1.5 million members, Jewish members. So they came forward, their heads. They said, we want to do something. We can't allow this kind of hate to be spread in America. So we invited them. They had a huge press conference in Washington, D.C., where they said, what's happening is not Christianity. What's happening is not Judaism. We cannot allow this kind of misuse of religion and hate. But they did something at the end of the day, and that's a gift to you, to the Muslim world, and that's why I wanted to quickly tell you that you have to go back with this one gift, because you have invested so much in our work here. They created a movement, a campaign called Shoulder to Shoulder with American Muslims against anti-Muslim sentiment. So they raised $250,000. They created the position of a director, executive director. So during the last 8 years now, this has been working assiduously. This is a campaign which is run by Christian and Jewish organizations. We are only the hosts. It is hosted in my office of the Islamic Society of North America. So it's amazing the way they have been working, and in spite of all the challenges that we have here and there. But it is a gift that is a real gift that has helped us. We can measure in what ways it has been able to fight against Islamophobia in America. It's voluntarily. So our prayer is a similar thing happens in the Muslim world, Muslims of different denominations and backgrounds understand that it is an Islamic duty for them not only to protect, but stand shoulder to shoulder with their minorities and deliver in a similar way. So I just wanted you to know that this is a reality. It has a name, it has an organization, it has a website. This year, they were able to sponsor iftars in 150 churches in America and similar other activities. These things don't come in the newspapers, but it is changing the face of America. The news that is made actually and conveyed to the rest of the world is Islamophobia and Muslim ban and so many other things that we are fighting. But the essence of America is this that I'm conveying to you as a friend, as a colleague who has worked with us shoulder to shoulder in creating this moderate, balanced understanding of Islam. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yes, I mean, I do not dispute what you are saying because the efforts must be done. But it is also to be unreasonable to deny the fact that the sentiments, inherent sentiments are still there. Islamophobia is a reality because of ignorance. John, for example, is not a Muslim, but he's under watch in the university watch because he speaks up his mind, talking about understanding, respect for religion, including Islam, and this is a powerful group with that influence. So, but it does not represent America. And I was here when I was teaching here. One of the great experience in years because people just take us as one of them, you know, not whether you are Muslim or Malaysian. So I think you are right, but I think do not then, because of the 50 personalities working, that deny the fact that this must be addressed at the community level, media, political leadership, which is reality. Like I think the earlier question about the intolerance of some difference. But what is more important to the Muslim world, to my mind, is the way we react. When people are poor and quite ignorant, they react to all violence. I was in India, in Pakistan. In fact, Mushahid was there soon after the burning over this issue, but the Dutch cartoon issue, which is to me damn stupid. But the way we react is certainly not consistent with the maqasid, with the ideals of Islam and Sharia. Because the way we react is burned. And it is not the Dutch cars that they burned, it's the poor motorcycles and cars of the Pakistanis. So I'm not suggesting that you burn Dutch cars. Please, misquote me. But you mean a level of education, understanding, and not hysterical reaction. We have enough scholars to be able to debate. This is what we mean by a reasoned discourse that this university is talking about, and particularly you, as a president, when you talk about quality education and enhancement of values and a reasoned discourse. This must be encouraged. But because people are just poor and they get very emotional, and we have some of the sheikh just inciting people. I mean, you talk in the remote villages in Islamabad and saying that you must fight them. Who? The Dutch cartoonists. They are nowhere close to you. So you end up burning the bus. And the following day, you don't have a bus to go to work. So then some of my friends there, Islamic, they say, Anwar, you used to be a bit too soft. Why are you now seemingly condoning those who attack Islam? I say, no, I disagree with them. You know, this sheer display of arrogance and ignorance is there and quite powerful. Mind you, the sympathy the Dutch cartoonists obtain is also, to me, unreasonable. I listen to some of the views expressed on television here. I mean, he's America, more sophisticated, educated, but sometimes they represent values which are so un-American. We from the remote villages in Malaysia, we talk about the debate among founding fathers, the tolerance, the academic and intellectual capacity, which is to me unrivaled in many of the societies. And suddenly we have some of these mediocre lecturers or political leaders talking and abusing as if they come from a semi-ignorant village area with hardly any understanding. So I think we should be consistent in our views, that we reject this, whether it is in Muslim societies or in the West, but more pronounced in our battle, in my battle within the Muslim society, is to encourage understanding. You see, and to get the governments to focus on their work, development, rid the country of corruption and abuse. And because this is actually what was tearing us apart. They're so grinding poverty is like a general rule. And people, at the same time, we have leaders amassing billions of dollars and talking about justice and humanity. Well, I'm sorry, I have very strong views on this, because people can talk about poverty in terms of statistics and data. No, I've seen them, I've lived with them, and there is no excuse. It will not happen if leaders are accountable. And that's why there is relevance for democracy, there's relevance for democratic accountability, including in the Muslim world. Thank you very much. John.
There's been some reference several times to the Bridge Project. The Bridge Project is called the Bridge Protecting Pluralism, Ending Islamophobia. If you want to see a lot of data on these kinds of issues, go to bridge.georgetown.edu. It's a first-class website, much easier to search now. And we have an area called Fact Sheets. And we look at all kinds of people in the world, including the current administration. I want to thank Anwar Ibrahim for a really great program, and I want to thank the President for hosting our program today.